So, good day, sir. Here's our report. Our report is all about taxation during Spanish period. So, first of all, here's our content. Introduction or acknowledgement, key taxes and systems, implementation of tribute system, major revolts against tributes, conclusion, and also references. So first is introduction. So taxation during the Spanish period in 1521 to 1898 in the Philippines was characterized by oppressive direct and indirect taxes. Notable that tribute to or general taxes, sanctum or church taxes, and puliway servicio or forced labor used to fund colonial governance and expansion. This along with the bandala or a forced sale of crops cause of numerous revolts. So taxation during Spanish period was compulsory, applying to all Spanish colonialists in the Americas and the Philippines for two core reasons. So, nasa ito ka reason. First is to acknowledge Spain's sovereignty over the territories. Second is to cover costs of pacifying or suppressing resistance within and governing the colonies.
K. Taxes and systems. Tributo. A hit tax on males 18 to 60, initially paid in goods, then cash. Replaced in 1884 by the Cedula Personal, a mandatory poll tax that served as ID, with non-payment carrying severe penalties. Kaning tributo kay mo na ginagamit sa una sa Spanish period, then pag-abot sa 1884 gilisan siya og Cedula Personal, then nahimong mandatory poll tax nga ga-serve as ID with non-payment carrying severe penalties. Diezmos Prediales, 10% tax on agricultural produce to support the church, much of which was sent to Spain. Kaning Diezmos Prediales kay kanang nagkuha siya tax sa mga agricultural products then ginatabang sa church. Caja de Comunidad was a colonial tax of 1 real levied on Filipinos to cover local town expenses, including building roads, repairing bridges, and improving public structures. It was meant to fund community infrastructure through implementation and use varied across areas. Later, it was consolidated into the Cedula Personal with the 1884 tax reform. Caja de Comunidad. Kaning Caja de Comunidad kay isa ka colonial tax of 1 real levied on Filipinos para makaber ang mga expenses sa isa ka lugar sa paghimo sa mga infrastructure. Then na-consolidated siya into the Cedula Personal with the 1884 tax reform. Donativo was a colonial tax of half a real initially intended to fund government military campaigns against Muslim communities in the Philippines. Over time, most of the revenue collected was diverted to maintain Spanish forts, particularly the one in Zamboanga. Like the Sanctorum, it was later incorporated into the Cedula Personal under the 1884 tax reform. Donativo. Kaning donativo kay isa ka colonial tax nga half real, then initially intended to fund government military para sa pag-campaign against sa Muslim communities in the Philippines. Then over time, ang ilang revenue nga nakolekta, ilang gidivert sa pag-maintain sa mga Spanish forts, particularly na gidatong nasa Zamboanga. Then pareha sa Sanctorum na incorporated po siya sa Cedula Personal under the 1884 tax reform.
Sanctum was a colonial tax of 3 reals imposed on Filipinos during Spanish rule. Ang sanctums kay muna siya ang mga buwis sa mga Espanya aron magpadayon pa ang mga Pilipino sa ilang pagka-Kristyanismo. Next. Bishop personal or polo wise service. Forced labor for public projects or military service. Later, reduced to 15 days with a fine for miscellaneous fees, charges for licensed land registration and religious ceremonies. Custom duties. Taxes on trade that favored Spanish merchants. Cedula personale. Cedula personale. Cedulas were first issued based on the Royal Decree on March 6, 1884. All men and women residents of the island, Spaniards, foreigners and natives who are over 18 years old were required to obtain a cedula.
Implementation of tribute systems. So local leaders, ang local leaders is mao ni siya ang, for example, kanang sa mga barangay, kanang naikatungod sa barangay, for example, ang kapitan, mga kagawad, mga inana. So next is enforcement. So ang enforcement is those who fail to pay face penalties like forced labor, imprisonment, seizure, or property or loss of legal rights. The cedula personal introduced in 1884 to replace the tributo was strictly enforced as proof of payment with authorities conducting regular checks. So ang enforcement is mao ni siya ang kanang nagbantay sa mga priso nga basta mo to exemptions. So exemptions is Spanish citizens, clergy, government officials, and some privileged indigenous elites were exempt, creating a stark divide between the ruling class and the tax majority. So revenue was funneled to Manila, then to Spain, with minimal investment in local structures or welfare. So next, major revolts against tributes. So Lacandula and Salayman. So nabasa na siya. So led by Manila's indigenous rules, this revolt protested excessive tributes and the seizure of lands by Spanish colonizers to suppress it, set a precedent for resistance. So next is Pampanga Revolt, 1585. So farmers in Pampanga rose up against high tributo rates and forced labor demands for building Spanish galleons. The rebellion was killed, but it prompted temporary adjustments to tax levels. So next is Sumuroy Revolt, 1649 to 1650, initiated by Agustin Sumuroy in Samar. This revolt began as a protest against tribute collection and forced labor for shipbuilding. It spread to nearby province, with thousands joining to demand an end to impressive taxes and foreign rule before being crushed. So next is Daguhoy Revolt, 1744 to 1829. The longest running revolt in Philippines history, led by Francisco Daguhoy in Bohol, while triggered by a priest's refusal to bury his brother. It also opposed excessive tributes and forced labor, establishing a self-governing community for over 80 years. Next is
Tax reform o 1884. So ang kaning tax reform is dili gid gasugod ang tanan no atong 1884. So same sa atong tributo kato aya na mo ang sedula sa 1884. So enacted via Royal Decree on March 6, 1884. This was one of the Spain's notable 19th century reforms in the Philippines. Na siya ay 2 key provisions. So first niya is ang abolition of the unpopular tributo replaced by the cedulas personal taxes. So sama sa gingod nga gina sa mga report sa nag-report ato is ato yung yagi nga Spanish period is lang ginagamit is tributo, tapos Itong pag-abot sa March 6, 1884 is nahimo siya sa dala personal tax. So next is reduction of annual forced labor or follow-wise ratio from 40 to 15 days. So the report is katong last reporters is include ba siya katong sa police servicio which is ang or gitawag siya forced labor. So, next is ang conclusion. So, Spanish taxation in the Philippines was mainly designed to support Spain colonization with the intention that Spanish crown authority be maintained. The economic impact of Spanish taxation created significant burdens for Filipinos, leading to suffering and resentment among the population and inhibiting the ability to create a viable economy that could support the Filipino people, resulting in an economy that is independent on wealth generated from exploitation of natural resources by Spain colonies. So, ang conclusion sa Spanish taxation is ilan ang gibuhat is para mas madali bitaw ang mga buhatonon sa mga tao kay murag advance sila siya sa mga generation karon. So lahir ang sa una is ilang pamagi sa taxation is murag lisod bitaw kayo. Di pareha karon is gamit na lang sila sa sidula which is giisa ratanan. So here's our references sa among report. Then